I am 99 years old. There's a rubber bag hanging on the wall behind me. Cracked, yellowed, the straps are stiff. My granddaughter once asked me if it was a purse. I told her no. I told her it was the reason she exists. She laughed. She thought I was joking. I wasn't. That bag held 10 minutes of oxygen. I used about 3 of those minutes rising through 180 feet of black water in the Taiwan Strait on October 25, 1944. I was 33 years old. I was the commanding officer of USS Tang, and 20 minutes before I put that bag around my neck, my own torpedo came back and killed 78 of my men. So let me tell you exactly what happened. The Mark 18 electric torpedo was the finest weapon in the submarine service. Unlike the older Mark 14, it ran silent. No wake of bubbles. No exhaust trail pointing back to your position. Japanese lookouts couldn't see it coming. Japanese escorts couldn't follow the track. You could attack from closer range, fire more torpedoes, kill more ships. Every submarine commander in the Pacific wanted the Mark 18. Every submarine commander in the Pacific accepted what came with it. Inside the guidance system, there was a defect in the gyroscope. Less than 1% of Mark 18s malfunctioned, but when they did, the torpedo turned, curved, circled back toward the submarine that fired it. The Navy called them circular runs. We called them boomerangs. USS Tullabee had been lost to one in March. A second boat, still classified to this day, went the same way. Both crews dead, except for one survivor from Tullabee who spent the rest of the war in a Japanese prison camp. I knew the risk. We all knew. But the Mark 18 had sunk thousands of tons of Japanese shipping. The advantages outweighed the danger. The statistics were clear. And Tang had never had a malfunction. Not once in 5 war patrols. By the night of October 24th, 1944, Tang had sunk more enemy ships than any submarine in the United States Navy. 116,454 tons. 5 patrols. Our third patrol into the LOC, we sank 10 ships in a single run. Most successful patrol of the war. Admiral Lockwood called me the submarine force's most outstanding officer. My crew called me the best skipper in the service. I'm telling you this not because I'm proud. I'm telling you because none of it mattered against a 1% defect in the gyroscope I couldn't see. That night in the Taiwan Strait, we were finishing the 5th patrol. We'd found a Japanese convoy, 7 transports, 3 tankers, 5 destroyer escorts, all moving supplies toward Leyte. I took Tang into the middle of that convoy. Surface attack, night, close range. We fired 22 torpedoes, 22 hits, 2 tankers burning, 3 transports dead in the water, 1 destroyer blown apart at less than 1,000 yards. I dodged two tankers that tried to ram us and watched them collide with each other instead. It was the most devastating attack any American submarine had ever executed. We had 2 torpedoes left. 2. And then home to Pearl Harbor. At 23:52, I fired torpedo number 23, forward tube 3, range 800 yards, speed 29 knots, depth 6 feet, straight shot at a stopped transport, 40 seconds to impact. The transport's bow lifted, broke, settled. That was our 33rd confirmed kill. I ordered the last torpedo loaded, tube number 4, the final Mark 18 on board. The crew ran the standard checks: battery voltage normal, gyro spin proper, propeller free, depth setting verified, everything perfect, everything ready. The transport had drifted 300 yards closer, range now 500 yards, point blank. The torpedo would cross the gap in 20 seconds. I gave the order to fire at 23:55. The Mark 18 left the tube. It ran straight for 3 seconds. Then I saw it broach. It broke through the surface and porpoised. It wasn't running at 6 feet. It was running at 0, skipping across the water. And then it turned, hard left, curving in a wide arc, coming back toward us. A circular run, the 1% malfunction, the defect that had killed Tullabee, now happening to Tang. I shouted for emergency speed, full right rudder. The diesels roared. Tang began to swing. But a 312-foot submarine does not turn like a destroyer. I watched the white wake curve toward us. 300 yards, 200, 100, 20 seconds from launch to impact. That's all we had, 20 seconds. The Mark 18 struck our stern on the port side. 575 pounds of Torpex detonated against the after torpedo room. The blast tore through the hull plating. The after torpedo room flooded instantly. Then the after engine room. Then the maneuvering room. 3 compartments gone in 15 seconds. 23 men died before they could react. The explosion threw me and 8 other men from the bridge into the Taiwan Strait. I hit the water and went under. When I came up, I watched Tang's stern drop. She went down by the tail. The bow rose briefly, then slipped under. Gone. My boat. My crew. Gone. I swam for 8 hours in the dark. 3 other bridge crew were with me. We didn't know if anyone was alive inside the submarine. They were alive. 60 men trapped forward on the bottom at 180 feet. The pressure hull held. The forward compartment stayed dry. But the battery fire had started. Chlorine gas from cracked cells. Electrical fire heating the bulkhead. The temperature inside the forward torpedo room climbed past 100 degrees, then 110, 120, 130, 140. Paint on the interior walls bubbled and ran in melted streaks. Men were collapsing from heat and bad air. 30 men in a sealed space, exhaling carbon dioxide, running out of oxygen, listening to Japanese destroyers drop depth charges overhead. They had one option: the forward escape trunk and the Momsen lung. That bag on my wall, a rubberized canvas bag about the size of a small pillow. Inside, a canister of soda lime to scrub carbon dioxide, a valve for oxygen, 2 breathing tubes with one-way valves. Inhale through one, exhale through the other. It gave you maybe 10 minutes of air, maybe enough to reach the surface from 180 feet. Maybe not. Most of the crew had practiced with it exactly once, in a training tank from 50 feet, in calm water, with medical personnel standing by. This was 180 feet in combat conditions, in the dark, with no help coming. At 05:30, the Japanese destroyer moved away. The crew waited 30 minutes. Then 13 men, the strongest, the youngest, entered the escape trunk one at a time, flooded the chamber, equalized pressure, 80 pounds per square inch, opened the outer hatch, pushed into the Taiwan Strait, breathed from the Momsen lung, ascended, exhaled continuously. Don't hold your breath. Don't ascend too fast. Don't black out. Don't panic. 13 men attempted the ascent. 8 reached the surface. 5 died during the climb. One man's soda lime canister failed. Another held his breath, and his lungs ruptured 50 feet from air. A third panicked, ripped off his Momsen lung, tried to swim up without it. Didn't make it. 2 others simply never surfaced. Of the 8 who broke through, 3 couldn't stay afloat. They drowned within sight of the rest of us. 9 men survived. 9 out of 87. A Japanese frigate picked us up that morning. On her deck were survivors from the ships we'd sunk the night before. Burned men, wounded men, men who had watched their vessels explode. They knew exactly who we were. The beating started immediately. Kicks, punches, rifle butts. I took the worst of it. Broken ribs, fractured skull, internal bleeding. The Japanese naval crew eventually pulled them off us, but the damage was done. They took us to Formosa, then to Japan, then to Ofuna, a secret interrogation facility north of Tokyo. The Red Cross didn't know it existed. No records were kept. Solitary confinement, starvation rations, constant interrogation. They wanted everything about American submarine operations, tactics, technology, patrol areas, radio codes. I gave them my name, my rank, and my serial number. Nothing more. Neither did my crew. They tried torture. They got nowhere. They transferred us to Omori, a regular prisoner of war camp near Tokyo. Forced labor, disease, malnutrition. I weighed 170 pounds when Tang went down. By August 1945, I weighed 112. The B-29s came that spring. We could see the formations overhead, see the fires spreading across Tokyo. Liberation felt close. It also felt like an American bomb might kill us before the war ended. On August 15th, the Emperor surrendered. American forces reached Omori on August 29th. I'd been a prisoner for 10 months. They evacuated us to hospital ships in Tokyo Bay, gave us food, gave us beds, gave us the first safety we'd known since the Taiwan Strait. In March of 1946, President Truman presented me the Medal of Honor at the White House. The citation described the attacks of October 23rd and 24th, the maneuvering through the convoy, the close-range shots, the destruction of 13 enemy vessels, the survival as a prisoner, the refusal to break under interrogation. The citation made no mention of the circular run, no mention of the Mark 18 defect, no mention that America's deadliest submarine had been killed by American technology. The Navy classified the torpedo problem. They didn't want the public knowing. They didn't want the families knowing. 78 families were told their sons died in combat. They were not told their sons died because of a defective gyroscope. Tang's record still stands. 33 ships, 116,454 tons. No American submarine in any war has exceeded it. Her third patrol into the Yellow Sea remains the most successful single patrol. 10 ships sunk. Those numbers have never been equaled. They teach my tactics at submarine school in New London. They study my patrol reports. They use my name in textbooks. And I am the man whose last order killed his own crew. You, whoever's listening. People will tell you that if you work hard enough, prepare well enough, execute perfectly enough, you'll succeed. That's mostly true. But there is a 1% malfunction rate in everything. In every system, every plan, every weapon, every life. You cannot eliminate it. You cannot predict it. You can only decide what you do when it finds you. I gave the order to fire. The torpedo came back. 20 seconds later, 78 men were dying. And the only thing left was what came next. I put that rubber bag around my neck, and I went up through 180 feet of black water, and I breathed. That bag is still on my wall, cracked and yellowed. My granddaughter still thinks it's a purse. I am 99 years old, and that bag is the most important thing I own.